So, Bob, it's been 3 months since we last talked and saw each other. It's probably been the longest stint of absence of you in my life in several years.
Yeah.
And when you came over and I said, it's been a long time. And you were like, yeah, how long has it been? Like 6 weeks?
Yeah.
And I was like, 6 weeks? No, I feel like it's been longer.
Yeah.
And I looked it up in the calendar. It's been 3 months.
3 months.
So apparently for you, you don't miss me as much as I miss you.
Oh, not true. Not true. I'm actually really glad to see you. I missed you a lot. You look taller.
So I have a really juicy email here.
Oh.
Anonymous patron. They write in and say, my partner and I have been seeing a relationship therapist since May of 2022. By the way, have you heard of this phrase, relationship therapist?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Relational sometimes is used. I find more people in marriage and family therapy using this term because it is more descriptive and more inclusive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So my partner and I have been seeing a relationship therapist, a couple therapists, since May of 2022. In October of 2023, so like a year and a half into it, I found out through my city's subreddit, that our therapist and her license was that our therapist had her license. That our therapist had her license suspended because of Medicaid fraud, resulting in $120,000 of restitution.
Whoa!
So it's kind of interesting that the anonymous patron would find out through the city's subreddit. You know, now maybe the therapist would have told the client eventually anyway, but it's just kind of notable.
Holy cow!
But anyway, yeah. So finding out that your therapist, presumably a therapist that you really enjoy working with, since you've been working with them for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And by the way, the topic of this email was, I want to invite my unethical therapist to my wedding. So that's the kind of conundrum of just like, what do I do with this? So that's, it would be quite a shock. So as a therapist yourself, Bob, when you hear, if you heard of someone being charged with Medicaid fraud or convicted of Medicaid fraud and ordered to pay $120,000 in restitution, what would you think?
I would be horrified. First off, in this county, therapists in private practice or whatever cannot see Medicaid clients.
Yeah.
They can only access mental health. Medicaid clients can access mental health benefit through some of the community mental health clinics. Mm-hmm. So it's a little weird for me to hear that a therapist actually would,
Right, because usually it would be like an agency would be...
Yeah, an agency.
Would be charged or convicted or investigated. It wouldn't be a private practitioner.
Right.
But my impression is a good portion of the United States jurisdictions allow for private practitioners to see people through Medicaid. And for people who don't know what Medicaid is, that's our government paid for medical insurance. And therefore it's regulated a lot more heavily, and the government's much more hands-on in terms of how the money is spent and whether or not it's on the up and up. And so in some jurisdictions, like in ours, I think throughout Washington State, I'm not sure, it's not allowed in our and at least in our county.
Unless it's an agency that's got
and
a
it's
contract.
It's sort of a pro and a con, because the con is that it's a huge revenue stream and business opportunity that is not available to private practitioners. But the pro for private practice is that it pays pretty low and has a lot of paperwork and can carry with it a fair amount of headache. So I never lamented the lack of access, but I've also heard, depending on what you're doing in mental health, it can reimburse well enough anyway, depending. But anyway,
how many hours would you have to defraud them for to make $120,000?
Yeah,
holy
right. I mean, if you think on average, and it's probably a high estimate of $100 per session. That's probably a high estimate.
That's probably high.
That's over 1,000 sessions that were, I'm just going to take a guess, were fraudulently coded or billed for or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And we don't know what she did. Did she, like, say she worked when she didn't? Did she?
Well, there's some details later
okay,
in the
great.
email.
Okay.
I actually looked up the
case?
the paperwork, yeah.
Okay.
So that trial was in December of 2022, and the license suspension was in May of 2023. So just going off of the timeline, anonymous patron enters therapy in May of 2022.
Right.
Then 6 months later, there's a trial
Yeah.
for this Medicaid fraud. So I guess one question is it wrong or unethical or something untoward of the therapist at the end, after the anonymous patron entered therapy, for the therapist not to say, by the way, I'm being investigated for Medicaid fraud?
I don't think so. I think it isn't necessarily a client's business if it doesn't impact them, and she's practicing within the scope of her license. She still has a license, so I don't think she's required to inform them about that. I don't think it's unethical that she didn't.
Yeah.
Like, what if it were bogus? What if it was, then.
Yeah. And it's not one of those things that would greatly impact, right? If it was some other kind of investigation, maybe, but, innocent till proven guilty, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the suspension was in May of 2023. So in all likelihood, there was a finding. And is your elbow hurt?
Yeah.
What happened?
It's mostly from just the bathroom remodel, just
Oh, really?
chronic whatever. Yeah.
Because it looks like it's really painful.
I need a new arm.
Really?
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just rubbing it helps. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Am I making noise? I'm not making noise, am I?
No. I just it just.
Yeah.
At first I thought you were itching, and then I thought,
Yeah.
is there? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The bathroom remodel still at it.
14 months.
So
in.
3 months hasn't ended the struggle.
No, it's getting there.
Is the floor done?
The floor is done.
Okay.
The tile's down. I got to grout it. Oh, that was an adventure. And then the plumbing's roughed in.
What's been an adventure?
The tile. I started at 10 in the morning on a Monday. This is 3 Mondays ago. And I got done at 11:30 at night. And I was just powering through. Colleen was very kind and indulgent because I'm using a really loud tile saw at like 11 at night. And she's just and it interrupts the bed, because it's going through the bedroom, whatever. So she was really decent about it, but I got the damn thing done and it's in. And then 2 days later, I dropped a tool on one of the tiles and snapped it. So
Snap the tile?
Yeah. So I had to pry it up and put down a new tile, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I guess that's the time if you're going to do something like that.
But it works.
The heated floor.
Oh, it's deluxe. Yeah.
It's not really cold yet.
No.
So
it'll
really be pleasant in a couple months.
In a couple months, yeah. So,
well, congratulations on that.
Thank
so
you.
Now what is it, like the sink and stuff?
Yeah, got to put in the vanity, but got to rough in the plumbing first. Then we can get the vanity in. Then the medicine cabinets got to be, cut into the wall, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then tile the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another
7 or
6
8
to
years.
8 years?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, trial December 22, license suspended May of 23.
Mm-hmm.
In May of 2023, she sent out a new informed consent form that was much wordier than the previous one and needed a close read to see that she was moving to a coaching model. What do you think about that?
People do it. It's kind of slippery. There's no regulation. There's nothing says that she can't do it. But it just seems like it's a way to lie in this particular case.
Why do you say that?
Because it doesn't sound like she informed them that she had her license suspended, and that's why she was doing it.
Right.
So CYA. But it's misleading, and now she's gotten caught because this person, at least who wrote in, found out about it. And how do they feel about it? I'd feel pretty skeevy.
How would you feel? Why?
Because my therapist is lying to me about something that's
fairly pertinent to my care. Yeah. Like, that's the whole reason for ethical codes and laws, to protect me as a patient and to learn that there's been a violation and my clinician lied to me, or at the very least, lied by omission or deceived or just failed to inform or something. I don't know. Now, it's possible that there's not a mandate that the therapists inform the clients, but yeah, it does come across.
It's immoral, I think.
Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah.
And this is why whenever I hear about therapists doing coaching, I cringe. There are absolutely clinicians out there that are on the up and up and keep the line between these two professions upheld and are doing so really well. Anecdotally, I would say it's far minority of people that are doing that. And also, can someone like this who has their license suspended operate as a coach and not harm others? It's possible, I suppose. But to me, it's a new trend that just wasn't happening 10 years ago. If you had your license suspended, then you were done. You were not practicing anymore. That's the whole purpose of this fucking protection for consumers, for citizens. If all it takes is for therapists to just send out an informed consent that says, I'm now operating as a coach, then what the fuck is the point of having these laws and these protections? They no longer exist because we allow people to sidestep it by becoming fucking coaches.
Yeah. Eventually they'll codify coaching, and there'll probably be a licensing or registration or whatever, some way to get that to happen. And then it'll be harder to do this, but someone will just change it to something else. They'll call it advising or something.
Right. Consulting.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Or the coaching regulations will be so lax that you'll just be able to sidestep it that way.
Right. So,
it's really fucking bothersome.
Yeah.
The protections were anemic to begin with, and I don't think I've ever thought this or said it out loud. What I just said earlier, as I was saying it, I was shocked at what I was saying. That our ethical guidelines and our the anemic legal protections for clients no longer exist.
Yeah, they do not.
If I were a unscrupulous therapist,
right,
and I'm like, well, what if I get in trouble? I would just say, well, it doesn't matter, because if the worst they can do is take away my license, and if they do, I'll just sidestep and become a coach. In fact, I'll start a coaching practice on the side anyway, so that I can start treating people out of my jurisdiction and do things that are outside of the ethical guidelines. And as soon as they take away my license, I'll just sidestep, and nothing will change, and I won't be monitored. I could do whatever I want. The fact that anonymous patron did not notice any change in treatment is a problem. Yeah. How can you go from a clinical couple therapy venue to coaching, and the anonymous patron is like, I didn't even notice a change? So if we go on the timeline, if we go from the anonymous patron's just perspective, they get this new informed consent form in May of 2023, and they're like, interesting. Well, I guess there's a new informed consent form.
Most people don't really read them, especially if they're lengthy.
Right. And it sounds like in the informed consent, which I just want to emphasize that term.
Yep. Informed, highlight.
Yeah. And it was not emphasized. I have lost my license because I committed fraud.
Right.
And I am switching to a coaching model because I am no longer legally able to practice in this state. That was not informed. That information was not properly emphasized. And, bearing it in a bunch of legalese does not constitute informed consent.
Right. This is my misinformed consent.
Yeah.
Misinformed consent notice.
This is my bullshittery consent notice.
Yeah.
And then, 5 months later, in October of 2023, the client's flipping through Reddit and looks and finds a notification or something, a reference to their own therapist having had their license suspended. So I would assume and I've never thought about this, of course, or not of course, but I would assume that when you have your license suspended, it's required that you inform any ongoing patients or clients.
Oh, it's abandoning care, right? I can't be your therapist anymore. Suddenly, that's actually unethical for sure and illegal to abandon care. You can get sued for abandoning care, which is a sudden termination for reasons that don't have anything to do with the client's welfare, well-being.
Well, but what I'm saying is that for the clinician, because usually, again, because of the coaching situation, it's all in the past. It would be unusual for someone to have their license suspended and for care to be continued. Usually, care would end naturally because that's the whole idea of suspending a license, and by definition, you would have to inform your clients one way or the other that treatment has ended. But now, I guess what the therapist would say is, no, I sent out a new informed consent form and the client signed it. A lot of different case law, court law, and other guidelines and literature states that just because your client signs your informed consent form, that does not constitute informed consent. You have to make sure that the client understands what they're signing and verbally go over things and document that. So this would be one of those things that you could not just get away with changing a few words on your informed consent and sending it out and having them sign it. That is like obviously a problem and super fucking shady. Look, if you do the crime and you're doing the time and you tell your clients and some of your clients drop out or whatever, then it sucks.
God bless.
That came on fast.
Yes, it did.
Then, them's the breaks. I would imagine most clients would stick with their therapist because, Medicaid fraud, it's not like learning that your client or your therapist had sex with a client or that your therapist had done something that you had already wondered about. There's nothing like that. But anyway, so yeah, super fucking shady and super annoying because there's a chance that as a client, if this anonymous patron or one of the other clients were to report this therapist, that nothing would happen. On paper, there's something you can do. You can make an ethical complaint. You can file a report with the state. You could sue the therapist. But there's a pretty good chance that nothing would happen because of this coaching thing. And because we have regulations regarding who can operate as a licensed medical or mental health professional, and you can take away those licenses, right? But there's very little consumer protection around someone who just gives advice. So if you were operating as a therapist unethically, doing treatment and basically tricking people, the only recourse you can take is, as far as I know, is to sue someone. You would have to demonstrate there was harm and that the therapist was negligent or purposeful that resulted in the harm that happened to you. And demonstrating harm from this sort of thing would be hard. It's possible, but it's not like hiring an unlicensed plumber and it resulted in a blowout in your basement and caused actual damage that has a dollar sign in terms of the repair. The therapy, the harm in therapy and the trauma of being lied to by a therapist like this is hard to put a number on, Yeah. And also, like, who has time for that as a client to sue someone, and who wants to pay legal fees for that? There's a huge barrier there. And meanwhile, in the United States of America, in 2024, we've slid backwards in terms of human protection, citizen protection against our own field. Yeah. Anyway, so we're only at the beginning of this email.
Oh, golly.
Going on. There was no discussion about it, meaning that the therapist never brought it up. And I ended up signing the informed consent without reading because I thought it was an annual update, and also because I was feeling pressure as I discovered it when I was looking for the telehealth link for our appointment in a few hours and thought I must have missed an email or something. Neither our invoices nor the content of the sessions changed, and we were still billed the same amount and under the same CPT code as psychotherapy.
I got a problem with that.
Yeah.
There isn't a CPT code for couple therapy.
Well, you can. There are CPT codes that can be used
I know.
under those circumstances,
I know.
depending on the situation. But
Bums me out.
why?
I think insurance companies are behind. They should be thinking about relationships as the client, and they can't. They have to think of individuals as the client, which means that if I want to either become a impaneled therapist in the insurance companies, they're big, gaggle of folks who they, say are good, or I want to provide a super bill to a client, I have to say that one of the people is the identified patient and the other person's just sort of a co participant. But that's not my client. My client is the relationship, and I think insurance companies should recognize that and actually would save money, because if people get treatment, they're better off. Like, it's probably cheaper than what happens if they don't get treatment, or whatever. So, but because they have to identify a patient, then in order to get access to their insurance benefit, I have to lie, which I think is fraudulent. I actually talked to a billing expert about this a couple of years ago, and she's like, "Yeah, nobody should do that, right? We just shouldn't bill." Because I had that question, because you could, and you could make a case for it.
Well, it's related to this case because, and maybe it's even a part of it. I mean, who knows?
The fraud?
Well, no, there's no, and I couldn't find that detail. But
that's interesting.
But if you did bill fraudulently, like if you billed to the insurance company that it was individual therapy when in reality it was couple, then you could be found to be committing fraud against insurance or against Medicaid.
I bet that's what happened.
I wouldn't assume that.
Oh,
actually.
You wouldn't?
No, based on the information.
Interesting.
Especially since the same CPT code was used post fraud conviction. So, I mean, there's a lot of room in the convicted of Medicaid fraud umbrella.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But that the therapist is using CPT codes is another lie.
Potentially, someone can make a viable case that, that some CPT codes can be used in a situation where you're seeing both the primary client and their spouse in therapy.
No, I get all that. But this is a person who's no longer a therapist, so who's no longer has access to the CPT codes.
Well, so on that front, so there's two levels to this. One is that the client is receiving bills or seeing bills or something that has everything looking exactly the same, even with a CPT code, even though it is now coaching, which has no CPT codes. And it, at the very least, looks like the therapist was just not getting their paperwork updated. And another layer is the therapist might have been trying to deceive people, their own clients maybe, because they didn't want to reveal that they didn't really want to tell their clients that she was now a coach and not a therapist. So she kept her paperwork the same. Or, and there's another layer that she shouldn't have been using CPT codes at all, right? And it's just another fraud. Now, maybe it was involved, but I imagine that if it was involved in the Medicaid fraud case, the therapist would have changed the CPT code because she would be mindful of committing more fraud. But who knows? But at any rate,
companies do not want to part with their money.
Yeah. At any rate, this is pretty sloppy work. It should have been extreme. The paperwork for the coaching should have been completely different. The informing of the loss of the license to your fucking clients who hired you under the umbrella of being endorsed by the state of Ohio. By the way, it's the state of Ohio. and to lose said license and not tell those clients is just extremely shady. But anyway, so going on. Other possible relevant details. There is an investigation ongoing by the State Board of Counselors. They've asked me if I wanted to participate as a witness, and I don't think that I do. The only time I felt like participating was when I was very angry about this and afraid that she might be more nefarious. Any thoughts on that, Bob?
Well, it makes sense. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Oh, we're back to that metaphor.
What
Remember the one? It was like where there's a fart, there's poop, or I can't remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, no, what did we say? Tip of the iceberg, or well, I used to say like stupid as a stupid does.
Right.
But where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, something like that.
Where there's a fart, there's a shart. If the fart has juice, then there's poop in your floose or something. I don't know. Anyway.
So yeah, I could understand being angry about that because you don't know. The absence of information means that a species which has a brain that has a negativity bias, people are just going to jump to conclusions that are generally negative.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the anonymous patron saying that they don't want to participate in the State Board of Counselors, which is, I'm guessing, the licensing board?
Yeah, probably like their version of the Department of Health, whatever,
Yeah.
licensing. I would feel exactly the same way. I wouldn't be interested in participating in that. I'd probably be questioning whether or not I want to continue in therapy.
But if you did want to continue in therapy,
then I definitely wouldn't participate in that.
because it would really be a weird dynamic in that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to testify against you, and you're going to be the therapist I need you to be. Forget it.
Yeah, right. I hadn't thought about that,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's certainly not the patron's responsibility to participate in these sorts of things. If the client doesn't want to, then that's fine. But this also alerts us to other charges because they've already had their license suspended, which means there already has been an investigation and a conviction and a license being suspended. If there's more investigation, then that means more charges. And God knows what that is entailing. And I guess if I were the anonymous patron, I'd be asking the State Board of Counselors, what is it that you're in? But I'm guessing they actually wouldn't say.
Yeah.
You can, I think, in most jurisdictions, actually look up ongoing complaints. Those are public. So maybe you could infer what they are doing. Anyway, let's take a break. We get back. Let's read more of this email. What do you say?
Yup.
All right, back from the break. So going on. The anonymous patron says, the basis of the Medicaid fraud conviction was that there was misleading wording, quote unquote, on some document of some sort. I have not seen what actual wording it was. So just chiming in here, sounds like, on some documents sent to Medicaid, which would in all likelihood be CPT related or misleading wording. Because misleading wording, you wouldn't necessarily, well, it could be, because I was thinking maybe overbilling, right? Yeah. Instead of an hour, you bill for 2 hours. Misleading wording, I could see officials wording it that way, but usually if it were just fraudulent billing of hours, especially on the level of that, $120,000 worth, then it would say inflation of reporting of billable hours or something. But misleading wording, I'm just trying to think like what that could be.
Do you remember those paperwork? Remember that stuff?
Yeah, I do. I mean, maybe like justifications for treatments.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Yeah, like saying that the client is having more symptoms than what they actually do have, or something like that. Who knows? Yeah. And I will say that, as you were getting at earlier, that, I mean, you weren't saying this precisely, but you were alluding to that a fair amount of couple therapists will arguably fraudulently use CPT codes that indicate treatment type, that are not actually descriptive or accurate of the treatment provided, because they are trying to shoehorn in their couple therapies so that the insurance will pay for it. And there are a lot of things that therapists and counselors and clinicians will do along those lines. There's a lot of things that are sort of in this gray zone, whether it's rounding up or and you'll be told all sorts of things by your superiors, because agencies will, in my experience, and it's been a while since I've worked at these places, but I have a number of venues that I can call to mind. Like in one of the agencies, they were talking with the state officials. So my bosses were talking with government employees, and my bosses would come to me and say, well, you might want to start rounding up in terms of the time.
Oh.
And I won't go into detail about to what degree they were asking me to round up. Yeah. And I would say, well, but what about the state government employees? They're a part of this situation. I'm not going to lie. And my bosses were like, they're on board with this. They can't officially be on board with it, but we've had long conversations about it. And what we have talked about, but I don't know, under the table-ish sort of situation, is that the state government employees are trying to help the public and are strapped in terms of cash and in terms of allocation of funds. But they also understand, in order to get good clinicians, they have to pay well, and they want to keep this industry working for the benefit of the people. And to do that, they understand that some accommodations have to be made, some workarounds have to be performed so that the whole system keeps working for the benefit of the people. And that means that, how about you just round up a little bit? And then my bosses would say, sounds good to us, because that means more money for us. And then they would tell the therapist, and the therapist is like, sounds good to us, because we might not be able to work in this kind of agency or with this kind of contract if we weren't paid a little bit more per hour on average. Now, you could argue that the client is suffering a little bit, because instead of getting 20 hours of service, they're getting like 18 real hours, But what the system would say is, well, in order to keep this ball rolling, we have to make these, we have to move stuff around here, you know what I mean? So that's just one of the several kinds of workarounds / fraud that exists within a system that is strained, and it's all word of mouth, right? There was no policy, there's no email that went out that said round up, that kind of stuff. So it's possible that this therapist came from a system like that, or worked with people that, now obviously this therapist didn't have some sort of agreement with the government, because they wouldn't come after the therapist if there was, you know what I mean? The government would, like, if the situation I'm talking about, if some watchdog were to say, hey, these people are overbilling or something, the government social workers would have protected us. They would, in my guess, they would be like, oh, no, we've got it. Don't worry about it. Like, here's what's happening. Or they would have buffered on some level, or it would have been a slap on the wrist or something. You know what I mean? Like, for her to be charged and convicted, in all likelihood, she was going way off script. She could have been way off script. I'm just saying there's a lot of possibility of what would constitute someone being convicted of Medicaid fraud. This is like, there's things that are kind of understandable, but things that maybe some people like yourself would frown upon. And then there's other things where it's just flat out, someone wakes up in the morning and says, ha, 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 I'm going to get mine. I'm going to screw over the system, and I'm going to lie so that I'm going to bill 5 hours instead of 1 hour. Or I'm going to even, and I've seen these cases where clinicians will even just make up a patient, or they'll do an intake and then bill weekly sessions with that client for 3 years having only done the assessment. You know what I mean? That stuff happens. And
Ugh.
yeah.
Maybe it was that.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. So going on. So just in case looking at the email, just in case you want to look her up, her name is Ashley Grinonu Denton, and she is in Ohio. So actually I looked her up, and she was convicted in December of 2022. This is all public information. And she was convicted of medical fraud, and it's a 4th-degree felony in Ohio, meaning that it is a pretty low-grade crime, but it's a fucking felony, because as it should be. So this isn't just like a licensing board thing, right? This is a crime, the kind of thing you would go to prison for potentially. So that's interesting, right? Like this isn't a licensing board hearing. This is a prosecutor in criminal court with a jury, I'm guessing, and so this isn't just like this minor licensing board matter, which is a big deal for therapists. To go through a licensing board thing is like one of the worst nightmares every therapist worries about.
Yeah.
But imagine going to criminal court for things that you were doing as a therapist.
I'd say I'd be sharding all the time, man. And 4th-degree felony just sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm surprised she only got suspended, which implies that she has the possibility of getting her license back as opposed to revoked.
Yeah. So here's the sentence that I found in the public records. Suspended license for a minimum of 3 years. I think meaning that if she were to not comply with the restitution, then the suspension would be amended. So 3 years. She will submit to a mental health and substance abuse impairment evaluation.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if that's some reference to data on the ground, but it's also possible they're just like, maybe you need to be checked out. Must receive personal therapy for 2 years, and after suspension, she must be supervised for 2 years. So on the scale of things, anecdotally, this is a pretty big license suspension. We'll hear about cases actually way worse than this, that the therapist doesn't even have their license suspended, and they have to take like 1 day of continuing education or something. I mean, like Jordan Peterson was engaging in hate speech against trans people on Twitter to his literal millions of followers. All he had to do was consult with an expert in how to use social media as a therapist for like, I don't even think it was stipulated how much time. So it could have just been like a couple hours of consultation. And he like completely flipped out and said, free speech. And it's like, it's not fucking free speech. You have a license to practice in Canada and you're getting off easy. But anyway, so you have a situation like that, and then you have a situation like this, and the person is suspended for 3 years. I would argue that whenever I hear about these more severe cases where they suspend the license for 3 years, I'm thinking, just take away the license. You know what I mean? It's like, so many people in our field, the rest of us are over here worrying about accepting a $5 gift card for Starbucks. And meanwhile, these bad apples are out there just causing harm and ruining it for the rest of us. Like, we don't need them, the very rare incidents of this, because the worry that I think that they have is if we take away the licenses, then there would be far fewer clinicians. And what I would argue is that we'll be okay. Society won't collapse if these individuals are not allowed to practice. And again, because of our stupid ass system, she can just go to the next state over and be licensed. She doesn't have to live there. You can be licensed in states that you don't even live in.
Yeah, I was thinking about getting licensed in California recently.
Yeah, because of online therapy. So you have, in the United States, you have 50 chances. You could lose your license in 49 states and still practice in the 50th state. There's no agreement among states along those lines. So it's yeah. Anyway,
So it's just more of a farce, more of a very weak set of protections for the public.
yeah,
Yeah, and
arguably non-existent, really.
Yeah, really, yeah.
If they can just be a coach and send out this bullshit informed consent, then they don't exist at all. Someone can be convicted of a felony in the process of providing a service, a mental health service. And the only reason why this anonymous patron would even know is that they were flipping through Reddit and found a random reference to this, which I find to be kind of strange because I look at Reddit all the time, and this isn't a common topic that is discussed in the subreddit of. There's two main Seattle subreddits, and they're usually talking about other kinds of things. And then you think about all the other clients. Probably this anonymous patron might be the only. Although at some point they reached out to the clients asking if they wanted to participate in this new investigation or this other anyway.
Yeah, so they probably would have. I don't know who it is. They probably would have found out.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's take a break and let's continue with this email. What do you say?
Yeah.
All right, going on with the email here. I felt like I was deliberately deceived by someone who I really trusted. Just chiming in here. How do you feel about that?
I'd say that's accurate. You were deliberately deceived by somebody you trusted. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because all therapists understand that, or just all humans understand that if you were in a situation where your license was suspended and you could no longer practice as a clinician, that you should tell your clients that you can no longer practice as a licensed clinician anymore. That's understood.
Right. We entered into this agreement with the understanding that you're licensed and now you're not, and you're not telling me that you're not.
Yeah.
So,
and you would have to actually kind of try to bury the detail of you becoming a coach in a deceptive way, right?
You'd have to.
Right. So this therapist sat down and said, okay, how do I trick all of my clients?
Yeah.
How do I get them? Because also, having clients sign a new informed consent, although should be done more regularly, I would be harping on my supervisees about this sometimes, because if you update your informed consent, or sometimes it's just a good idea every year or two at the very least to just go over the informed consent again, just because people will forget. It's also a good way just to remind yourself as a clinician. That's half the reason why I had my informed consent form, was to remind me of like all the nuances of confidentiality and stuff. And so, because it was always changing and evolving over time and with new case law. And so, but yeah, so this therapist sat down and said, how do I lie to all of my clients that I am switching them to coaching customers and they are no longer clinical clients of mine and won't be for years, and I was convicted of a felony? How do I trick all of my clients? Now, I'm guessing that there's a justification there of like, well, it doesn't really impact them, and I'm helpful as a therapist, and my clients would even potentially in the end benefit by them not knowing about this, because it would just throw a wrench in a treatment that's already working, and maybe that's all true, but
it's also a self advocating rationalization.
Right.
Yeah.
Going on. I asked for my money back as I paid out of pocket, and she was not cheap. She actually immediately agreed to pay me back when I reached out, and after I received the first payment of $300, I initially felt better because I felt like some trust was restored, but then I felt worse because I feel like I am extorting her. Is the anonymous patron extorting the therapist?
No, I don't think I'd ask for my money back, but I don't think that the person is extorting the therapist.
Yeah. Why?
The non-therapist.
The coach.
Because I think that's just a personal choice. And this person doesn't sound like they're extorting. They're like, oh, I know how I'll get my $300 sessions, get that money back. It doesn't sound like they're actually interested in the money. They're interested in some kind of repair of the breach. So it's only extortion if it's extortion, which is you're doing it because you want the money.
Yeah.
But if you don't want the money, you don't care about that. It's incidental to you, but it's a way, it's a method of repair, then, or a method of self-protection. Like, I'm not going to go gently into the good night just because they lied, right? Fine. Then ask for your money back, or demand it, or whatever it is you did.
Yeah. The essence to me is I was paying for a clinical service. You lied, and I did not receive a clinical service by definition, and therefore give me my fucking money back. That's the way I would see it. Arguably, coaching should be a lot fucking cheaper because you're not a clinician. You can't diagnose. You're not qualified to provide treatment. You're just a regular fucking citizen walking around in the street, and I'm not going to pay
with an opinion,
a regular fucking person's opinion at $200 an hour or whatever
it was.
If I'm going to pay big money, I'm paying for a clinical service. Plus, you fucking lied. Give me my money back, or I'll see you in court, and I'll win because you know that I will. Anyway,
right.
So,
which is probably why the therapist didn't even put up a fight. Just
right.
Like, I'm better off if I just agree to what you want, and on we go.
Yeah. Then emailer, an anonymous patron, goes on. She is filing for bankruptcy, which doesn't surprise me, given that she has to pay back all this. So I think that the $120,000. Apparently, I think there's a lot of restitution that she has to pay in monthly payments or something, and I don't know how much that is, but
it's a freaking mortgage payment.
It could be a lot.
Yeah.
But
it's probably penalty and interest too. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
She is making several types of restitution payments. There is a new suit that is being brought against her LLC. I talked with my partner, and we both agreed to ask her to pause the repayments indefinitely. I asked her if we could reassess what repair and or resolution might look like for us, and she agreed. She also thanked me profusely for my compassion. My question is there something wrong with me to want to be nice to my therapist? Am I lacking some kind of self-preservation instinct? I have this fantasy of inviting her to our wedding next year. She did genuinely help us a lot, but she has also caused a lot of chaos in my life. I feel like I get this way whenever there is conflict. As soon as I sense the other person's humanity, I immediately drop my own self-interest. I start dreaming about what it would be like if we could just all get along. So, Bob, chiming in here, is there something wrong with anonymous patron?
I don't like the sentence, is there something wrong with? But I do have a similar question, which is, what you doing? Last week, something happened to me. Let's see, how much of this do I want to say? Somebody that I know that I'm close with is upset with me. I think they're probably a little bit exaggerating in terms of how upset they are, but nonetheless, they are upset with me. And I noticed that my initial response was one of really intense shame that lasted a good couple days. And so when I think about that, I think, well, this is something in my psyche, something in me that is maladaptive and probably linked to the experience of, one of my folks being pissed off at me when I was a little tiger.
Meaning that your current situation doesn't call for shame, doesn't call for even guilt, maybe.
No, it doesn't actually call for either. I sent them a text. They read it a certain way, and they were annoyed by it, and they let me know. And I read it a different way and have a different perspective on it. Nobody's right. It's just point of view. So I don't want to, do the opposite and go on the attack or anything. I don't want to do that. But I don't think that I did anything wrong. I think that it hit them wrong. It hit them, the way it hit them. And that's both legit and also theirs, not mine.
And so regardless of validity, if someone is upset at you, then it triggers you and you go into a childhood mode of accommodation and shame and self-hatred and self-punishment. And for an honest patron, they might go into a similar but adjacent mode of, they're being human. Can you understand that part of it of like, well, the therapist is sorry and
humble,
is thankful for me saying, don't worry about the payments. They're a human being. And now I've completely changed my stance on it. Maybe the little bit of humanity in this person completely eclipses my needs, my rights, my self-preservation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I wouldn't want the money back if I were in this situation. I don't think there's anything wrong with seeking it. It's fine, whatever. Everybody's got their own thing. But I think the fantasy about inviting them to the wedding or whatever, that business, I think that does say something about what's going on inside. Maybe a difficulty with observing one's own limits or feeling okay that one has limits, that it might get, there might be a distortion. So I'm not saying that me not seeking the money is the right or a good thing. That could be one of my own, a version of my own distorting. I can actually feel inside me slipperiness there, where I can't tell if it bothers me. I'm putting myself in that person's shoes and I can't tell if it bothers me or not. And when that happens, I think my cheese is sliding off my cracker, right? I'm stuck in one of my own projections or distortions or whatever we want to call them, and not good at seeing, more objectively, I guess that's the way to put it, the up and down side of each bit, like the up and down of not asking for my money back, or the up and down of asking for it back, or the up and down of bringing them to the wedding or not. The fact that they're humble, I'm guessing that the therapist is having the non-therapist is having a lot of practice being humble. And we don't know anything about them. And I don't think we need to say that they're twisting their mustache and they're kind of this, black and white evil thing. They're not. They're probably just an average dude, average person, whatever. Did the wrong thing. But there isn't really much in the world where I couldn't see me doing what other people do. There's a couple cases where I would never behave. I can't imagine a circumstance that would lead me to behave in certain ways, but we're all turkeys in the same turkey soup. So if one person's capable of it, a lot of us are capable of it. That doesn't make, that population bad or evil. That's just too black and white. It's too convenient.
Yeah. No. There's no evidence of psychopathy or sadism or con artistry or something.
Yeah, right.
We just don't know.
We don't.
Like I said, even the Medicaid fraud, the convicted felony fraud, could, if we heard the circumstances, you and I might say, well, geez, that was a huge risk you took. But I remember making, a 5% in that direction decision when I was starting out too, or something. And, but at the same time, it could be quite elaborate. There could be a lot of different aspects of con artistry in here. The fact that it sounds like there's multiple suits and cases that are ongoing, and the fact that they were even pursued at all by a prosecutor, because if this was just small potatoes, I don't think the prosecutor would bother with it. But anyway.
But we don't really know.
Right. And you and I have no idea who this person is, and so we don't have any positive associations. The anonymous patron from the report had they really liked this therapist. And if it wasn't for all this fraud and ethical cases and everything, anonymous patron, it sounds like, would say, I'm really glad I found this therapist, and I had no problem with this therapist, and the therapist really helped me, to the point where the therapist helped me and my partner be a stronger relationship. And now that we're getting married, I want to invite this therapist to my wedding as a thank you, and my history of not self-preserving, I'm wondering if I'm just doing it again, So, it does raise an interesting question. And I think that the question is, so here's what I would be doing if I were in your shoes, even without traumas like this, is I'd be thinking, okay, what did the therapist do to me? Now, because I'm discovering what the therapist did to Medicaid, but it's a nameless government agency, and I suppose there's an overall disbenefit to that because you're sucking away taxes that could be allocated somewhere else. But did the therapist do something to me? And I would answer the question by saying, well, the therapist, in one way of looking at it, is the therapist lied to me with the informed consent and tried to trick me. And on the scale of lies, it depends on how you look at it, I suppose. Was it intentional? Probably. Was it done in a way that was callous and disregarding of my baseline needs? On one level, yes, because I have a need not to be lied to and to be able to trust people. But on the other hand, I might even see it as I'm glad that we switched to coaching and didn't end treatment, because it would have been a pain in the ass to look for another therapist to start over. And I actually got a lot of benefit from this therapist. So I'm glad the therapist fudged the rules on that or sidestepped, because it actually benefited me, It would have been nice to have a reduction in the fee, but what are you going to do? So that's what I'd be thinking. And if I felt like that was a big deal, then I'd react like it was a big deal. If I felt like it was not a deal at all, what do I care if the therapist sidestepped some ethical code or some practice that I don't know much about or care much about? Then no skin off my back, and we're good. You know what I mean? I guess it'd be like if I found out that, if you had done some crime or something, like you had some ring of stealing stuff from Starbucks for like a year or something and got convicted, would that change my relationship with you? No. Like, it's no skin off my back. It's weird. We talk about it, but you weren't coming after me, and maybe you were lying to me. Like if I asked you, like, oh, you got a brand new Maserati, like how'd you afford that? And you'd be like, oh, I've just been working hard as a therapist, and you'd be lying to me.
I would,
but I would understand. I might even thank you. It's like, well, yeah, don't drag me into your. No, well, actually, you have to keep this on the DL, but I've been stealing shit from Starbucks. I'd be like, interesting detail to have to kind of rewrite my impression of you, but you didn't harm me. Yeah. You weren't stealing my stuff. You weren't nefariously coming after my things in my life. You weren't trying to hurt me. We had a good relationship, and you were doing this weird thing on the side, One could argue kind of a victimless crime going after Starbucks, and one could argue the therapist was just defrauding the government out of money they should be allocating to this sort of thing anyway, or something.
You could make the case.
And therapists don't get paid enough anyway a lot of times. And Medicaid, from my understanding, certainly doesn't reimburse very much, and you could consider that kind of a crime. So, there's a lot of ways to look at it.
Sure. That's the thing, is there's a lot of ways to look at it. So.
Yeah.
I like being clear about what was done to me and making my decision based on that data, because I don't give a shit about Medicaid. That's not me. That's Medicaid. So that's fine. I mean, that's fine, but that's not me. So what's been done to me is really a very good question to help inform what do you want to do with that your old therapist going forward, if anything. So
yeah.
Going
on with the email. This whole issue feels so complicated, and yet nearly everyone I tell the story to wants me to get litigious and fight.
Oh.
Can you see that as being a reaction from people?
Yeah, I can, but I don't see any basis for it.
Yeah. I think it's a real common knee-jerk reaction of friends to have that of like, screw, kind of like maybe our initial reaction.
Sure.
Like, screw this person. Like, you don't need that shit.
But that's that person's, who knows, maybe they're having a bad day.
No, I feel like most people in my book, it's sort of like when you go to a friend and say, oh, you repeatedly tell your friend about how your spouse is a jerk face at times. A very frequent advice from, or at least a thought that your friend will have is, you should divorce that person. Or if you're complaining about your job to your spouse, they're like, oh, why don't you quit? It makes it cleaner for the listener. It's less messy, and it fixes the problem from their point of view because it's over, but it doesn't fix your problem because you need a job and you have attachment needs. You can't just at every problem just break up with everybody.
Just oversimplify.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think for friends, it's just like they don't have a connection with the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care. They don't because there's an argument that could be made that for the therapist's overall good, for the client's overall good, that if the therapist took action, for the client's benefit, if the client went after the therapist, then it could taint the whole relationship and cause a fair amount of distress for the client that in the end could produce a worse outcome for the client. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I actually think that's true.
Yeah.
That's likely.
Yeah. So I would wish that the anonymous patron's friends would consider that, I'll
tell you, man, the one thing that I've learned in the last 30 years is I don't know shit. So if I come to a knee-jerk response to pretty much anything, that's just a knee-jerk response. I don't have, my feet aren't in the other person's shoes. I don't know nothing. And so one of the things I've learned to do is just shut my fucking face.
Ending the email here. I'm fairly certain that's not the answer for me, getting litigious and fighting.
Yeah.
But I'm having trouble thinking of what actually could help. I'm also wondering if there is something about my personality that will make me choose options that are ultimately self-destructive and keep me from meeting my needs. Can you shed light on this? I'm very lost. I am afraid I'm going to come away from this feeling like I messed up somehow. I'm afraid that we'll reach a resolution and my therapist will be happy, and then much later I'll feel resentful and unable to bring the issue back up. End of email. Final thoughts, Bob.
There is no statute of limitations on you learning yourself. And so if 15 years go by and you discover that really bothers you, and for whatever reason you had a blind spot to it, then who says you can't bring it up later? Bring it up later. There's no clock, right? So that's sort of this artificial deadline that, we all know how to do this. We know how to put artificial deadlines on ourselves and say, well, I have to have this wrapped up by, I've got a 14-month bathroom remodel. I thought it would take maybe 6 months, but here we are, 14 months in. So there's no clock. Let's see. What was the first part of what they said? Because I wanted to respond to that.
I'm afraid I'm going to come away feeling like I messed up. I'm afraid that we'll reach a resolution. She'll be happy, and then much later I'll feel resentful.
Was there something before that?
I'm very lost. Can you shine light on this? I'm worried about I'm getting involved in my self-destructive tendencies.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, do you have self-destructive tendencies?
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Okay.
Or lack of self-preservation tendencies.
Right. Well, maybe it's not that simple. I mean, considering if you've really been harmed, and then what exactly was the harm? I mean, I agree with what you said a couple minutes ago about, well, they lied to me. Now, to me, that's where the problem is. And what damage did that cause me? Like, you're not continuing in therapy, right? Like, you're voluntarily left. It seems to me that it would be weird if you had said, okay, well, we're just going to keep seeing this person for couple therapy because they've been helpful so far. Like that might be sort of.
I'm not sure if they aren't, actually. I mean, do you remember me reading anything?
They didn't say one way or the other.
I have a feeling they are continuing because.
Oh, they are?
Well, at the end, an anonymous patron says, I'm afraid that we'll reach a resolution with the therapist.
Yeah.
The therapist will be happy, and then much later I'll feel resentful and unable to bring the issue back up with the therapist.
Well, I stick to that. You can bring it up if you need to bring it up. It doesn't matter. That's fine. But I don't think I would stay in therapy with this therapist. They're not the only game in town.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. There's plenty of good therapists.
Right. And yeah, it's a pain in the ass to switch, but it's not like the end of the universe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The wisdom with that is, look, this person has some massive red flags about their integrity, and I can't foresee them harming me directly. But if a therapist was at risk of harming me directly, this is the one. And if there are other therapists out there, in all likelihood, these other therapists will be the type that will be completely paranoid about accepting a $5 gift card from,
right.
And would never overbill and would never round up and would never all that kind of stuff. And so, that's one way. But, another way to look at it, and honestly, I think this is where I would be, because I've been in this situation before, not exactly, of course, but that I would say, okay, what if I just thought, and this is just one mode of thinking, if I just thought completely selfishly, like what is what I want? What are my needs? What would I do if I could just do what I want to do without anyone influencing me, without Bob or Kirk influencing me or my goddamn friends who don't know what the fuck? What would I do? And I might say, I benefit from this therapist and I don't give a fuck what anyone else says. And the therapist has some problems, but not my problem. And the therapist is facing the consequences or I guess my coach, technically I'd be saying my coach has problems. And when I go, to therapy or to coaching with this coach, and get coaching, I leave better off and our relationship is better off and I'm going to take mine. And that's all that I need to know. And, screw the rest of this stuff. Or if I thought this coaching is mid at best, then I'd be thinking, well, I don't owe this coach anything. So, I'll I'll just ghost the coach and I'll find another therapist, I'll find a therapist, because you don't have a therapist anymore. You have a goddamn coach, and, I'll move on. Because, even that question of like coaching, right? Because people will say your therapist isn't a therapist. You're being given clinical services through a coach. That's unethical. You need to terminate with that person. But again, given what I'm gleaning from this email, I would be thinking, I see that. And that is not my business. It doesn't impact me that this coach is acting unethically by providing a clinical service. That's between them and the state and everything. Right. But I actually want this coach to be providing these clinical service because I trust it and like it. And it's a couple therapy. It's not like schizophrenia treatment or something. And I get a lot out of it. And I know how to detect if I'm being harmed or, like if the coach started to, I don't know, fraudulently ask you to sign papers or something. I'm just trying to imagine like what would be a reasonable scenario that the coach would pull the client into or something. I mean, obviously coercing the client into supporting or lying for them, which I can't foresee given what we've heard so far.
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound like a likely.
Yeah. I mean, if the coach had no clinical experience and training, and then you'd be like, well, God knows what this coach would do because they don't have any background really. Right. But since presumably the coach is staying within the bounds of their clinical lane, then although they shouldn't be doing that, in terms of between them and society and the government, if I were the client, I'd be like, well, I wouldn't want my coach to scale back to just a minimal area of coaching, non-clinical services, so, that's what I'd be thinking.
I think if I was going to stay, I'd be asking the coach, how will our work be impacted by, like, how do I know you're going to be able to be the coach I need you to be in 6 months? Or if you're going to be just dealing with so much turmoil that you just toss in the towel or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd also say, what's the going rate for coaches? Because I want to renegotiate our fee. Yeah. Because you're not my therapist anymore. You're my coach. And if we agree to that, then I should be paying market prices for market rate for the non-clinical service that you provide.
Yeah.
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 So, and also I'd be thinking, well, because I'd be thinking, are you going to maintain the same kind of standard of getting training, continuing to learn? Or are you just going to be like, okay, I'm a coach, I don't have to do any of that stuff anymore? Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd be a good therapist if I wasn't going to keep learning and keep making effort to learn in formal and informal ways.
So if the therapist said, well, I'm just doing all the normal things that I was always doing in terms of staying up to date, what would you say?
I'd say, okay, well, that bodes well.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'd renegotiate the fee. And
what if they didn't lower the fee?
It just feels kind of shady to me, like you're not a therapist, but you're going to behave as a therapist in every single way, including this way, and this is where the issue is.
But some coaches cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So the going rate is a bit amorphous.
Well,
there's a wide range.
Are you still going to be providing relational coaching to other people, or is this just because we have this relationship? Because I don't see why I should have to pay.
Well, she would obviously say, no, I can't provide clinical services because I don't have a license to.
Great. And what are you going to be charging people out there in the universe when you provide relational coaching?
Yeah. All these questions are justified.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see this therapist squirm under pressure, but I don't imagine the emailer, the anonymous patron, is going to do that. And,
really?
And yeah, given the way that she's saying. And I don't think I would do it. I mean, would you do it if you were in this situation? If you were going to stick with this therapist, would you interrogate? Because, I don't use that word lightly. It's like you're cornering the therapist and confronting them,
Well, I'd say I'd want to put the cards on the table so I was making a good decision for myself.
Yeah, it's justified, and...
Would it be easy? No. Would I like doing it? No. Would I do it? I don't know. I hope I would.
If I were... This is just me.
Yeah.
Conflict avoidant, I suppose, is that if I were faced with that impulse, I would just terminate and find another therapist. I'd be like, there's no outcome from this that will... Because even if the therapist answers the questions pretty well. And also, I guess if I were in a therapy scenario like with your therapist where it's all about the relationship, then maybe I'd be like, wow, this is going to be grist for the mill. But if it's couple therapy and it's mainly about our communication and stuff, I think it could really bog the countertransference down and the transference down, and I'd just be like, yeah, like this is getting to be a lot, and I don't really want to get to know my couple therapist. I want to get to know my spouse, while my couple therapist helps me with that. So I
agree with you.
Yeah, and any therapist worth their, or I suppose coach even, worth their salt. Is that a phrase?
That's what. Yeah.
I wish I had you around all the time, because I'm always on the podcast and in the videos that I make attempting. It's like I have the idiom in the back of my mind, It's like there's a memory, there's a couple words. Maybe it's actually part of my dyslexia that I have self-diagnosed, that I wonder if idioms, because it kind of feels like that. Did I tell you that I have mild dyslexia?
No.
Oh. So my dad has dyslexia.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I never even considered having dyslexia or anything of the sort. And something happened like a few years ago. I can't remember what it was, but I just asked the question, wait, do I have mild dyslexia? And it's so obvious that I have dyslexia. There's so many things that are so obvious about it. I read faster out loud than in my head. I've always said that. And whenever I say that to people like you and Stacy, they're always like, what? Why do you read so slow in your head? Well, it's because I can't keep the words straight in my head. And by saying them out loud, I can keep them straight. You remember that old technique in the second grade where you'd put a ruler under the text to stay on that line? I do that today.
Good.
But most people don't need to do that.
No, most don't do that anymore.
I don't know if you noticed that when I was writing my book that you were helping to, help me with writing it, that earlier drafts, I think you came in later on, but the earlier drafts were a lot of bullet points. I am obsessed with bullet points. Like this emailer that emailed in, naturally, it's in paragraph form. That's how people write. Every email that people send in, I go through the entire email and organize it into bullet points. Topic sentence is the bullet point, and then I indent the supporting ideas.
Fantastic.
But most people don't need to do that. They would be able to read on the air and retain and be able to keep their eye in the right spot if it were left in paragraph form. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I have to. So even when I was writing my book, I organized it in bullet point form.
I think that's fantastic.
Why are you saying fantastic?
Because it works.
Yeah. But it's evidence. I'm making a case for the fact that I have dyslexia. Well, and I'm also a terrible speller. I still can't spell receipt or receive or accommodate or...
I can't spell rhythm. I still don't know how to spell rhythm. There's no vowels.
That's true. Yeah.
So anyways, I think that what you've done to accommodate your brain is fantastic.
Yeah.
And anybody could do what you do and benefit from it. Like if I were so inclined, bullet pointing would make this a lot easier for me to follow.
Yeah.
If I were doing, looking at the screen like you are.
Another thing is when I first started reading emails on the air, 10 years ago-ish, up until maybe 5 years ago, I would stutter. I still kind of do, but it was worse before because I wasn't accustomed, and the plasticity of my brain took a while to kind of build up that pathway of looking at the sentence and the words, comprehending what I'm reading and saying it out loud in a fast way. And I've gotten better over time. But anyway, my point is that with idioms, I wonder if, because it feels the same, like when I go in my head of like, why do I have the memory of an idiom? And I have like some of the words, but when I try to say it out loud, it all comes out in a jumbled mess.
That's interesting.
And it feels like it's in the same part of my brain as the struggles that I have with spelling and reading in my head and keeping my eye on the page, in the order. I mean, my impression is regular people like yourself, you don't even necessarily track the words. You just sort of glance at the sentence and it gets comprehended, right?
When I read, I don't see words. I see pictures in my head.
So your brain is just subconsciously like picking up on the sentences, and you're like, you don't have, like, in that sentence could be a word like of or the, and you're not like consciously registering. I register every letter. I have to look at every single syllable.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think that something about reading out loud, because there's a part of your brain that processes language that's right next to the auditory system. So it's probably a fantastic accommodation that just makes use of that particular juxtaposition. It's Broca's area. And who knows? Maybe there's something going on with the two language process centers that generally the humans have.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
When I think about, worth their salt, is that the idiom?
Yeah.
Someone's worth their salt?
Yeah.
That I've heard it enough times because I feel like I might not have ever said that one, but I've heard it enough times that it's, it's in that zone of my head. And as I'm about to recall it and say it out loud, it gets jumbled, and then I get insecure about saying it. Like if I would have just said it so I was saying, if the therapist was worth their salt, if the coach was worth their salt, that doesn't work, right?
Yeah, no,
if
that
the
works
counselor is
great.
worth their salt.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably like derives from when they would use salt to like pay for things or something.
Yeah.
And even as I check it just before you say it, there's a part of the brain that's like, okay, you're about to say this thing. My brain is like, I have no idea. I have no confidence that the way, it feels natural to say that, if this counselor was worth their salt. There's an editor in my brain that says, you have no way of answering the question as to whether or not this is accurate or not. So just don't say it or something, and then I get kind of backed up, and then I ask you, and then you say that don't feel bad for it. It's not
Your life's going well in so many other ways.
I have enough confidence and privilege in my life that it's not a hardship. If anything, it's just a funny little quirk of mine that crops up. It's a known thing in my reaction videos that I'm terrible at idioms, and I like it. I think it's just kind of funny.
Kind of fun, yeah.
It's like, because idioms are kind of funny. They're kind of fun. They're like they're these weird language phrases that you might hear 15 times. Like worth their salt. I might have heard that 15 times in my life, and somehow that's encoded in my long-term broca's area, if you will, and it gets randomly flipped through on the Rolodex of possible ways of describing what I mean in this moment, and then I'm about to say like idiom, and it's disconnected from like logical, precise language, right?
It is. The brain is a trippy place.
Most idioms we have no clue like how they came about,
right? Which
is
fascinating when you read up on them. They're fascinating.
Yeah. I'm fascinated with, and I don't know, I'm sure others have gone over this, linguists and historians, but I'm fascinated with idioms that we as Americans bastardize in a direction that reflects our fucked up culture, like pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. The real idiom or phrase or idea is one of falsehood, that it's making fun, it's pointing out you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Oh, but we've turned it opposite.
Yeah, because of our fucked up culture.
Oh, yeah.
Because we can't handle the idea of people not being able to independently manufacture their life. And we can't handle the notion that maybe disadvantaged people are disadvantaged because of society, because of me, not because of themselves. And so we take a phrase that was originally intended to highlight that we are not independent creatures, and no matter how hard you try to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you're getting nowhere. And somehow we bastardize it to mean the opposite. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's fucking weird. There's another one in there too. Well, one that's not really exactly, but it's in this camp, is the myth of Icarus, that people say, oh, you don't fly too close to the sun. Okay. And that's true. But it's also in the story, Icarus's father, I can't remember his name, but he tells his son Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun, because then the wax will melt and the feathers will fall off and you'll plummet and die. Also, don't fly too low to the sea, because the mist will cause the feathers to get weighed down and you'll fall and you'll die. Don't fly too high, don't fly too low.
Oh, we skipped the low part.
We skipped the low part. We've erased the low part.
I didn't even know about the low part.
Right. Neither did I. I mean, I'd heard about it, in grade school when I learned about the myth. But isn't that weird?
Yeah, because it changes everything. And
it changes everything.
It's so cool when you think about it the way it's written, the way it's truly written.
It changes everything. I talked about this in did you listen to my hubris episode where I pogoed off my head? So that was my main metaphor, was that don't fly too close to the sun. And then I wrap it up with, at the end, because that's the whole thing about the hubris and flying too close to the sun. And I decided to take this electric bike and a BMX track, and I pogoed off my head. Then, did you know I pogoed off my head? When? Oh, God, I really haven't seen you in a long time. Long story short, I was with my family. We were riding bikes around. We rented these electric bikes, and there's this little BMX track, and I went into it and stupidly just went headlong, literally and figuratively, into the BMX track, and I came over this ridge, and on the other side of the ridge was basically a cliff, and I didn't know there was a cliff because I didn't slow down and look before I went over this ridge, and I had extremely limited time to react, and I haven't ridden a bike, and I've probably ridden a bike once or twice in the past like 20 years or something, and I used to ride bikes all the time, so it's like riding a bike, but also like I watch a lot of videos on Reddit and on YouTube of fails, and I'm always thinking to myself, one, those days are over for me. I'm 53, so I'm feeling. I'll hit my hand on a doorknob and hurt for like 3 weeks. So I'm like, okay, those days are over. And I've seen too many people, try something for fun and then they're paralyzed for the rest of their life, And so I'm like, never, no. I'm not ziplining. I'm not skydiving. I'm not doing any of that shit, even though the risks are pretty low, but I'm just like, yeah, it's just not worth it to me. And so, but yeah, I crashed and I broke my rib and I had a concussion and I injured my spine and and I'm still, it's been almost 3 months and my neck is still fucked up and I think my rib is still broken. I looked up, I talked to my doctor and they say like it takes 6 weeks to heal, but then other people will say, well, it could be healed, but it could be sore for another number of months. But anyway, so in the episode, I say that, because I'm really beating myself up in the episode. I mean, not beating myself up, but reminding myself of, because that was the first thought I had as I was going over are you about to cry?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, you're my best friend.
Oh, well,
Jesus,
I'm okay.
I'm glad you're okay.
Well, nice. I'm glad that you don't want me to die.
I don't want you to die.
Yeah.
Not yet, anyways.
I'm okay.
Not
Sorry,
before the cat and dog bowl.
It was startling that you were crying. I was like yelling, are you crying? Yeah. Well, that's nice of you. You should be laughing at me. I deserve to be laughed at. I deserve to be cried about if people are worried about me dying. I deserve that. But I also deserve to be laughed at because it was fucking stupid. Yeah. Oh. Well, so that's the other part of the story was, so I have a large ass fucking head. Okay. And now you're laughing. That's good. And when we rented the bikes, we got a bunch of helmets, and when you're renting a helmet, these are discarded helmets that God knows where they're from, and so I pick up a helmet and it does not fit onto my head. People say, well, can't you just sort of shove it on? No, like a hard shell bike helmet, it would just be sitting on top of my head, like if I had like half of a ping pong ball on my head. You know what I mean? And which reminds me of Runaway Ralph, which is a book I read.
I remember Runaway Ralph.
I think he had half of a ping pong ball as a helmet.
As a helmet?
He strapped it on his head.
In his little motorcycle?
I have that book up there. Anyway.
That's amazing.
So I was prepared, stupidly, to just ride without a helmet. Because what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Like run to the store?
Right. How often do you crash on a bike, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then one of my family members was like, well, mine's pretty big. In fact, I think it was Kyle, who is my nephew, who is a doctor, who actually was right there, thank God, when I pogoed off my head. And he was like helping me and telling me to stay on the ground and don't try to stand up and stuff. And she's like, well, mine's pretty big and my head's probably a little smaller than yours, so maybe I can switch with one of the other more spare ones and you can use mine. And it did fit on my head barely. I mean, I had to really kind of cram it onto my head, but the strap wouldn't fit around my chin.
So it's just friction fit?
Right. But believe me, there was a lot of friction because the thing was crammed on my head.
Woof. So
when I go over the handlebars and I land on my head, as I'm landing on my head and my spine is just like I'd never, I played football. I've had several concussions. I've broken my back. I still have a broken bone in my back from my time playing football. And when I hit, I remember thinking, I've never had this. I've heard about this experience that when you land on your ass or when you land on your head, you will feel the pain in the middle of your back because your spine is compressing. I had that feeling, and I'd never had that feeling before. You know, where the pain is not where you're being hit. I also hurt on the top of my head, but I also thought the pain is so intense in my back and on the top of my head that the helmet must have flown off because it felt like I was hitting rocks. You know, like the rocks were going into the skin of my scalp. But Dr. Kyle said, no, you landed on the helmet. And then we found the helmet, you know, it had all these dents in it. So like if I didn't have the helmet, if the helmet wasn't lodged on my head or I hadn't had helmet at all, like I'd probably be dead right now. I don't know. But anyway, so it's also possible that the idioms were killed in the process of the brain damage that I bestowed upon myself after pogoing off my head. But so at the end of the episode, I talk about, so I spent the whole time, you know, the episode talking about, I flew too close to the sun. Like, come on, like you were telling yourself, don't do that. But then I said, there's another side. You're also, I learned when I looked up, because I wanted to make sure I had the myth right for this episode, we're also told not to fly too low. And we need some risk and fun and not hubris, but taking the leap sometimes and believing in yourself and stretching yourself. Like to be conservative and careful and safe is to be not living life. So it's about not flying too close to the sun and not flying too close to the sea.
Yeah. Right on.
Do you feel like you're flying too close to the sun or too close to the sea?
Too close to the sea.
How so?
Oh, I don't take much risk. My life is, you know, pretty small.
But, you know, that could be a good thing.
It's not bad. I'm not unhappy, but I guess one of my worries is, you know, come to the end of my days and regret. People generally regret what they didn't do rather than what they did. So, yeah, I have that concern. So, but I don't think I fly too close to the sun by any stretch. I don't.
You're not pogoing off your head.
That sounds awful.
It was very sweet of you to cry. It's funny because in a few minutes, Jessamy is coming over, a friend of mine who was a student of mine years ago. When she heard the pogoing off my head episode, I got an email from her saying like, and she didn't reference the episode, I don't think. And she's like, hey, you know, I just wanted to tell you what a positive impact you've had on my life. And she laid out like all these things, this kind of things that you tell a mentor, you know, a teacher. You know, I have these people in my life, like every once in a while, you'll just be like, oh man, I'm so lucky to have had that person in my life in that way. And you reach out and you're like, hey, thanks, you know, like a football coach or something, you know. And it was one of those emails, which I don't get very often or ever. And I mean, from people in my, you know, patrons will email in and say nice things, which is really great and keeps them going. But I was like, oh, that's really nice, you know. And I'm thinking, and then a little bit later, I'm like, wait, did she listen to the pogoing off my head episode and like worry that I was going to die soon? And so she felt like she should tell me these things before I die. Like it was one of those things like, what if he dies and I never told him these things? And she's like, yeah, that's why. And then we were talking and then we were like, oh, you should come on the podcast and we can talk about how your career is going and stuff. And anyway, so it's funny that, you know, I guess I don't think about that. Like if I'm going to talk about pogoing off my head, I don't want people to like worry that I'm going to, I mean, it's nice that people worry I'm going to die, but that wasn't my intention.
I understand.
But you had a similar reaction. It was like, oh shit, like Kirk's pogoing off his head, like he could have died. Now I have to reckon with he could die. And I suppose once you get to a certain age, you start thinking that. But I don't know, 53, I have a long time left.
I think about it all the time.
I think about it all the time too, but you know.
I think about it the other way.
What? Other people leaving? Other people dying?
Oh, I think about that. No, mostly me. I don't think you're nearly as afraid of it as I am.
Nearly as afraid of death?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Are you afraid of death?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck, I didn't know that.
I'm not afraid of death or dying. I'm fucking upset that I will and everyone else will die.
Yeah.
I'm angry that that life is finite.
Yeah.
I hate that aspect of life.
Yeah.
It bugs the shit out of me. In the grand scheme of the universe, we get just this tiny little fraction of a picosecond, and then it's over, and it fucking sucks. And the older you get, the faster time goes by. And I mean, I'm grateful to have, because, if you think sort of philosophically, like there's an infinite number of souls or possibilities that never had the opportunity to experience life. And I was granted that. But one day it'll be over, and I won't even be able to reflect on the fact that I'm dead. And
that's that Rutger Hauer line in Blade Runner.
Does a robot dream about what's the line?
something electric sheep.
Oh, yeah.
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 No, at the end, he's crouched down and he says, all those things I've seen, all those experiences will be lost. And then he says, like tears in the rain, which he improvised.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have heard that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful line, and really speaks to
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen things you people could never imagine.
And I remember always wondering, what was that, That whole ending of that movie confused me as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I had to watch a number of YouTube videos as an adult to understand it later on. As a kid, I'm like, huh?
I didn't understand it at all.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, you wanted to kill him and then you save him. And it took me a long time to understand, wow, he's the most interesting character in that film.
Yeah.
And very interesting. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the original story was centered around him, right? Like the title.
Know. I never read it.
Oh.
That's Philip K. Dick, right?
Yeah, I think the original title is that line, is Do Robots Dream of Electric Sheep, which always kind of confused me because we don't dream of sleep. We count sheep to fall asleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's
kind
is that
of
what
a
it
weird,
means? Oh, I didn't know. I never.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shit.
Because it seems like, do robots dream? But maybe it's just sort of metaphorical, like because sheep, when you think of sleep and dream, and it all kind of gets jumbled up there. But anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, so when I have problems recalling an idiom, I now have an excuse. I'm not just stupid. I'm stupid and dyslexic. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself and don't pogo off your head and don't fly too close to sun, but don't fly too close to sea because
you deserve it.